Welcome everyone to this service design workshop. We're going to start with a small presentation about service design as a whole, as a design practice. And we're going to bring an example to explain how a user journey map works and also how a service blueprint works. Okay, so let's start with a blunt definition of service design. If you Google for service design now, you will find a whole bunch of definitions because we acknowledge the fact that service design really lies at the intersection of various design skills or design activities. For example, user experience or user interface and consumer experience design, but also digital transformation, especially, for instance, if you are an agency or a business that wants to move from the offline world into the online world. How do you do that? How does that change the services that you provide? That leads me to, for instance, system and strategy design. So once you figure out what these new systems that you want to have in place, how are you going to implement them? What are the tactics that you're going to use to bring these services to the market or to make your consumer or user aware of them? Once you do that, obviously it will impact your current business model, and you might need to go through a redesign of your current business model, and service design has a lot to do with that as well, especially because it goes to look into how the organization behind the service works and what kind of new or different capabilities need to be built in order to deliver services. So in summary, I think service design is just a big crossroad of different practices. And the unique thing is that it delivers value to multiple stakeholders and multiple users at the same time. Okay, moving on to the next slide. As you can imagine, service design is layered. It has visible part, a part that the user and the consumer is exposed to, and it is a more invisible part, which is behind in the background, inside the company or organization that delivers that service. And to make that a little bit clearer, we're going to go through an example that I mentioned in my last workshop, which is this IoT service. So let's pick an example of an insurance company that decided to look at new ways to be closer to their consumer and really try to delight them by removing all the bureaucracy and annoyance of going through, filing a complaint when something goes wrong with, for instance, your house insurance or your car insurance and things like that. And they decided to do that by looking at Internet of Things, for instance. Why couldn't we use some data that we can gather from our house devices in order to really understand what our consumer wants and needs in order to tailor insurance policies that are really specific to their needs, perhaps even saving them some money as well as time. So obviously there are two sides. There is the consumer side and the company side. But say we wanted to develop this service based on IoT devices placed around the house. How would that work? So moving on to the next slide. Here I represented it in few simple steps. So at the top you can see subscription plus setting. For instance, if you were to subscribe to this new insurance policy service, you would subscribe and create an account. And you will have to decide what kind of devices in your house are being connected to this service and what kind of data are being taken from them. So everything is in your control and in you're aware of everything that is going on in the system. And then you receive regular checkups. You receive advice from your app, your service, on, for instance, small things that you could prevent yourself in the house. For instance, say you have a house insurance, to prevent bigger damages, for instance, like a leak, because your Google thermometer detects humidity, and it can tell you, hey, we perceive an increase in humidity in this part of the house. Maybe you could try and go and fix it before we run out in bigger problems. And this could be part of the service that the user is exposed to. And then time goes by, and then unfortunately at some point there is a bigger damage. Say, I don't know, the whole kitchen gets flooded with water because the leakage got so big. Well, at that point the user still interacts with this interface and files a complaint to claim some damages from their insurance company by using a chatbot. So very quickly, very smoothly, without too much time delays, they just can open the chat, ask for, use their insurance, and have it sorted out really quickly, really painlessly. So all the things that I just talked about are user actions and touch points. So the touch points are all the elements on the interface and interactions that the users are asked to act upon, which are put in place. And the user actions, it's self-explanatory, is what the users do or can do with those. So this is the more visible part of a user journey and a service blueprint. As you can see here, we have also an emotion analysis of all the steps. So that's also an interesting thing that you can do in service design. You can really ask yourself and write user stories, which you can see on the slide, short text with description of how the user feels at different stages. So you can have these emotion graphs to really understand the highs and the lows of their emotional journeys as they go through this service experience. So all these things are the visible thing, the things that we can experience in the physical world, although it's digital. But what happens underneath? So moving to the next slide. We call it line of interaction. So whatever has happened that we can see and experience, and it's really targeted to the user, is on the top. While what happens underneath becomes gradually more invisible and in the background, but it's still crucial to deliver this service and delightful experience, for instance. So in the stage, in the line between, in the space between line of interaction and line of visibility, say you were to develop, in this case, for instance, there is nothing going on in between these two stages because everything is handled in a digital way. There's no human interaction between the user and someone that works for this organization, for instance, or for this insurance company. But say you were to have part of your service to have a phone call with someone, you would place it there. You would say in the front stage of the service, although happening in the background, is that there's someone available for in a call center, for instance, available to answer questions. And then we go even deeper. So in the line of visibility, and you go and understand how the systems behind this beautiful interaction, this delightful interaction work, and what kind of steps need to be put in place to make it work. So for instance, there's a whole line of steps about the IoT system. So what kind of data are being collected, at what point, what kind of feedback loops are in place to have reliable risk assessments to be delivered to the users. And also what kind of auto-filling, claim, and preventative alert systems you need to have in place that keep feeding into our computing power, basically, and that makes sure that the service doesn't have any gaps, that is completely streamlined. So all these things, as you can see, are set up step by step, and they are connected to each other. But what becomes really so this is the line of visibility. This is what's happening in the background of the service, the digital infrastructure behind it. And then we go even deeper. So below the line of internal interaction, we go and look what is happening inside a company to make this service happen. So for instance, just to give an example, maybe insurance businesses are mainly run by people who have experience but with law or policy making, and they can really understand these nuances. But with this new service, they will need a data scientist that can give insights in terms of how risks are prevented or managed. So that is required as a capability that needs to be required and needs to be put in place. For instance, this data scientist might need to manually check the reports or assess if everything works fine, or code. Say yes, there's another programmer need to code and create and maintain this service alive in different steps of in the different steps of the service. So these are all questions that you ask yourself. Okay, at this deeper level, what kind of enablers are there inside the company or business that delivers this service to have to deliver such a nice service to their consumer, for instance. I hope this this example clarified a little bit how a user journey and a service blueprint can come together by looking at these different lines from the line of interaction all the way to the line of internal interactions. Moving on. So at this stage, I think it's interesting to reflect, even when you design products, for instance, Internet of Things products, in today's society, is almost inevitable to run into some layers of service design, especially when we're in the realm of technology and digital services, because it's something that we interface on a regular basis, and it has room for improvement all the time, basically. So how could this be meaningful to you for your project? Well, there are very few steps that you could start take into account if you want to engage in a service design exploration. The first one is the mindset. So I think what is interesting about service design is it really requires a certain mindset that forces you to think in processes and in experiences that have a beginning and an end. And once the beginning and ends are very clear, it becomes really easy to see the steps. Even if these processes are loops, it's pretty handy to have that mindset that everything can be plotted or mapped into an experience in a timeline, basically. After that, you can follow design thinking approach by using empathy as a step. You can go and identify, for instance, the emotional journey that your user or consumer goes through and map it out against this map of steps, and really understand what are the pain points and what are the highlights of this experience. And once that is visualized and it gives you insight on what is actually needed. This brings me to my third point, which is that I think what is interesting about service design is that it forces you to really simplify and understand the problem in such depths that it becomes easier to come up with solutions that actually mitigate and prevent users' pains, rather than creating a new thing that we assume will make it better. So in a sense, it just makes everything simpler, and it really shows that easy, small tweaks along the user journey can really have a big impact in mitigating and preventing pains. And last but not least, of course, once that more like higher level is very clear, and it's the more I would say the most creative part of the service blueprint, then it becomes really interesting to look into the deeper inner layers and deeper levels of how it works from a technical standpoint, from the infrastructure standpoint, but also what does that mean for the company, startup, organization that delivers that service? How does that shape or reshape their business model? I think with this, I finish my presentation on service design, and I look forward to see you all in our brainstorm on Mural. See you later. Do you guys have questions? Was it clear? I hope so. Oh, hi. Yes,
It's
sure.
Rachella.
Hi.
Hey, yeah, it might be a bit specific about my research, but maybe it's valuable for others too. But I was wondering, I am researching now how students from industrial design build AI services with the user experience in mind, and I want to organize a workshop on such a future service. So I think the blueprint service is very interesting. The example you just showed. But I would like, for example, if I want to know specifically about data ethics too, and I want to add a layer in that canvas or in that worksheet as well. Do you have any tips if you want to combine different worksheets? When is it too much, and when do you ask too much questions?
So I hope that the next part of the workshop in Miro will give you a little bit more insight in terms of combining different tools. And I think
Yeah,
your question is completely valid because it's always tricky to know exactly how many layers, how much in details you want to go when you build this layered service blueprint. Um, I think the most crucial thing to have and be very specific about is having a clear idea of the beginning of the experience and the end of that experience. So because we tend to have a bit of an interconnected mind, so we tend to think like, oh, but then at that point something else comes in, and then at the same time something else is happening. As long as you have the beginning and end very clear, it should help you understand what's happening vertically in a pretty specific way without getting blurry information from what's happening even before or after or in contexts that are not necessarily related to that. I don't know if that answers your question a little bit.
yeah, yeah. It's interesting what you say. So if you have a very structured layers and you read it vertically all the time, it
Yeah,
it will help to keep the overview. Okay.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Thank
exactly.
you for your answer.
No worries. And in
Thank you.
terms of combining canvases and combining layers, Miro itself has so many canvases that you could use and combine. I did myself made a very interesting collage of things just for this workshop. So I don't think there's like a very specific script. It's really about knowing what information you need from your participants and just make sure that they can be creative but within certain boundaries so that you don't have just a
Yeah.
monster of layers that are just perhaps lost or disconnected from each other. Yeah, does that clarify a
Yeah.
little bit? Okay,
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah. Thank you.
No worries. More questions from the audience? All right, I see feedback that it was clear. That's nice to hear. So if there are no more questions, so I was planning on giving. I adapted a blueprint for a project to community business. Yeah, I think there is a feedback or statement from Verle. Yeah, I think it's a pretty yeah. I hope everybody can read the chat. Verle, feel free to jump in and share your thoughts with us.
Yes, so this was more of a comment to Rachelle, but I think for a project, I simplified the service blueprint because I thought it was a bit too, all the layers were a bit too complex to tell the story I wanted to tell. So I think that's also where you need to look into like what elements are crucial so that you just not for the overloading aspect. So it's more of like, that was sort of my remark.
Indeed.
Not sure how it's
Okay,
here.
thank you. Yeah, I heard it.
Yeah. Fantastic. Yes. So I think the blueprint can be as detailed and complex as you need it to be, depending who your audience is. But it's really a question of what you want to get out of it and what you need to communicate afterwards once you have this blueprint. You could use the blueprint and then develop a business model canvas at a later stage once you have this clear idea of what it is that you need, what service you want to deliver. Yeah.